I understand there's a holiday coming up, and apparently we are hosting some relatives, and apparently we don't have a nice serving tray. So my response was, well, why can't you just use a cookie tray or something? But we can't do that, so now I have to make a serving tray. Hello everyone, Holly Inlay here for Woodworkweb. And I thought, this is a great time for someone to show off some of their woodworking skills. When you're making a serving tray and it's actually going around from person to person, what a perfect opportunity to make something a little bit special. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So the wood I selected is something called Locust, and it's a very yellow wood, and I just wanted to give you something by comparison. So this one is pine, this is walnut, and this is what the Locust looks like. It's a very yellow wood, and it keeps its color very well. So we're going to use that, and then I'm going to use a plywood mahogany base, and I'm picking plywood because plywood doesn't move and go back and forth like a natural wood would do with the moisture, exchanging moisture. So that's what we're going to do, but we're going to do something a little bit special with this too. We're going to do some inlay in the bottom of the tray. So this is more than just a simple tray, and because I hate using nails unless I absolutely have to, I've decided that on the corners we're going to use box joints. So we'll be able to glue that up. So we're going to show off box joints and inlay. This should be a nice looking little project once. Now we're at the table saw, and I've already set up the box joint jig, and let me show you what we've done. The first thing we have to do is set the blade height, and I just used a little bit of scrap that I cut off on this material, and that's got the blade height set. The next thing you need to do is to set the offset, and you can see where my finger is down in this hole here, and this back pieces here, I actually have this piece of plastic that I use that's actually a 1/4 of an inch, exactly 1/4 of an inch, so it's the same thickness as the blade, and I just use it to measure. So these two front pieces right here, these leading pieces, they're actually butted up against this. These are a 1/4 of an inch back, and you can see how that fits in there. So I'm just going to go ahead now and we'll cut all those box joints. Now we just take those joints, or those pieces, and turn them end for end. I'm at the drill press, and I've already marked where I'm going to drill my holes, and I'm just going to drill 2 1-inch holes. and those will be for the handholds, and I'm just going to cut the wood out between those right now, and that'll be all ready. Those two holes, and you could cut those out a variety of ways. You could cut them out with a scroll saw if you have one. You could cut it out with a saber saw or a jigsaw if you've got one. I'm just going to use the little fret saw and do it by hand. It's only going to take a couple minutes. I'm going to do it off camera. It's just a couple of, just going to draw a straight line across on each one and just cut it straight across. I've moved along a little bit off camera. I just cut the sides to the width or the height that they want to be, and I did the same thing with the ends. And I've also, I don't know if you'll be able to see, but I've also marked where I want the little handle to be. So there's where the edges will come in and the handle will go up like that. Now I have a scroll saw that I could cut this out, but a lot of people said, well, why don't you use tools that we all have? And one of them suggested jigsaws. How come you never use a jigsaw? So today, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to cut this out and I'm going to use a jigsaw because it's a more common tool than a scroll saw. We'll probably have to do a little bit more cleaning up after, but at least it means that it's another tool that we get to use. Before I clean up the handles that we just made, I'm going to go to the table saw and cut the rabbets for the bottom, and we'll do that next. So there's the dado. You can see that from an end view if I get that in the right camera angle for you. So that's what it looks like. It's pretty small dado, and there's the sides of the two pieces that I just cut. And you can see there's a bit of burning, and that's pretty normal that you would get in a thing like this. This wood tends to burn a little bit anyway. So that's all there is to it. It's pretty simple. To clean up the handles, the outside of the handles, I'm just going to use my belt sander that's mounted on its side. And there's a foot switch on the floor, so I don't even have to turn it on and off. I just use my foot to turn it on and off with. For the inside, I'm just using one of these little drum that fits a sleeve like that in my drill press. What you're looking at here is my test strip with some scrap of the back, because I wanted to see what the cross cutting was going to look like. Now the first one that I cut, the first test that I cut, you can see the tear out. This is the kind of tear out that I'm getting, and I'm just going to turn it around a couple of angles so you can see what the tear out looks like. It was quite severe. And this is the bit that I'm using. It's a pure carbide, just a spiraling bit, and it's going to cut those dados. Now the one that I used, this one here, which is a much cleaner. Of course, going with the grain, we don't have too much problem. It's going across the grain that we're having the problem. And what I did in this one is I simply used some blue painter's tape, and I just covered over top before I cut, and you'll see when I do this. And what that does is it prevents a lot of this tear out, and some very fine sanding after, and it just eliminates it. So it really saves all this mess here that you get when you're cutting across the grain. Just one of the little tricks that we've learned. Here we are at the router table, and you can see that I've installed the blue painter's tape. I think I might have said green before, but blue painter's tape, and I put it on there, and and rubbed it down good so it's on there well. And I've installed the bit in the router, and we're just going to go ahead now and we'll do all the cuts. We're going to stain the bottom of this, the base of this tray, and I'm going to do that right now so that it has time to dry, so that when we apply the inlays on there, it'll give a nice contrast. So, and there's our finished base, and we're just going to let that die dry now, and we'll be ready to, when we come back, we'll be ready to cut the inlays and start gluing those in. I'm over at the table saw, and I've just uninstalled my 10-inch blade, and I'm installing a 7 1/4 inch 40-tooth blade because it has a very fine curve, and that's what we're going to use to cut the inlay strips with. Here we are at the table saw, and this is the piece of holly. It's a nice white colored wood. And I've already set up our little jig for cutting thin strips, and I've checked it. And the first thing we're going to do is cut through here and get a very thin strip. The next thing I need to do is cut a very thin strip, and there's my measuring bar there, and right about there is good. Now, the reason I have this auxiliary fence is because my other fence, this tends to slide underneath it, so I have to have another fence that this will butt up to. So let's make that cut. So there's all of the cut strips that I've made, and we're just ready to start putting those in and gluing them. But I thought I would show you this as well. This is one that I dyed, but you can actually use felt pen on that too. It does just as good a job. And if you don't have dye, you can make some pretty neat things. You can even do this stuff on end and recut it again so that you can get something like that. So lots of neat things that you can do with this. Now I'm going to go ahead and start gluing this together. And I have a little scrap piece here, and I'm going to put glue in very lightly and on both sides. I want to make sure in this case that I don't get any squeeze out, and if I do, I want to tackle it right away, and that fits in there just perfectly. So because this is a bit of a long, tedious, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do it off camera so that you don't have to watch. So that's pretty easy, gluing that in there. That's pretty easy, gluing that one in there. The next one I'm going to do is this one, and I'll put that in there like that. And you can see this one actually has a little hitch in the end of it. So I'm going to cut that off, but here's how I cut these pieces. I actually use a square, and I will put that on my cutting board here, and then I can run it up like this, and I use a chisel, and I mark it. Now that's, you can't see inside here, but this is absolutely square. And when I put that on the end like that, it's going to give me an exact square cut, and then I can give that a tap, and that will give me an absolute square end. And when you put that together, you can see how nicely that butts up there. It's just it's a perfect end. Then I'll need to do the same thing down here and mark it. When I come to doing these sides, what I will do is just cut one end and let the other end hang off a little bit, and then I can just trim that later because the rest of the tray will be sitting over top of that. So that's what I'm going to do, and when we come back, we'll have this all glued up and ready for some finishing. I've done all the sanding on all of the pieces here, and the glue is nice and dry, and we're going to apply a little bit of tung oil now. And I wanted to do this so that you could see how the tung oil brings so much life to this. Now we've completed finishing our piece, and we gave both components 3 coats of tung oil, and now I'm just going to glue and tack them together. And because there's a bit of a bump on here, I need to lift this up off the workbench a little bit, and we're just going to glue this now, and we'll put a couple of tacks in there in each side, and we'll glue the bottom in there so that it's nice and secure. This concludes our little serving tray project. We got to use a variety of woods. There's locust on the sides, mahogany plywood base with holly inlays, and of course we got to use box joints on the corners so it makes it real sturdy. And then we finished it all with 3 coats of tung oil, and it gives it a very nice finish. So if you like what we're doing, we ask you to subscribe to this channel. We also ask you to follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. I'm Colin Gannett for Woodworkweb. Thanks for watching.